That's exactly right.
That's what it is. So I immediately knew there's no chance that's a Will Cain special.
I will introduce you to, as we move on in this calendar year, into guys like Chris Stapleton, Sturgill Simpson. I will introduce you into outlaw country. Not just old country, but outlaw country. Don't worry, your cultural enlightenment is on its way.
I'm ready.
Okay, good. I'll tell you what else could possibly be on the way, and this one isn't quite as jovial or happy. It's potential lockdowns across this country. We start to see state by state talk about instituting lockdowns as coronavirus cases rise. But President Trump announced yesterday that while a vaccine is coming and will be available for millions within weeks possibly, he will not, during his administration, endorse or put into place any type of national lockdown. Listen to this.
This administration will not be going to a lockdown. There won't be necessity. Lockdowns cost lives, and they cost a lot of problems. The cure cannot be, you got to remember, cannot be worse than the problem itself. This administration will not go, under any circumstances, will not go to a lockdown, but will be very vigilant, very careful.
Yeah, and obviously we've been talking about the implications of these lockdowns, not only on businesses shutting down, the economy, but also on the mental health of individuals. It grows really exhausting after a while. We had Dr. Siegel on earlier, and he weighed in on lockdowns and stressed that maybe they aren't the best way to stop the spread altogether. Here's what he had to say.
70% of the spread of COVID goes on within households. So lockdowns don't do what they're really intended to do. What you'd actually need is a targeted lockdown where you say, wait a minute, that was a super spreader place. Let's close that. You know, schools are not places where COVID is spreading easily. Maybe we can keep the schools open. That's the way to look at it. If we can do the basic public health measures and keep the testing going up, then lockdowns shouldn't be necessary.
Yeah, you know, guys, I was in Manhattan. I try not to go in there too often these days, but I was in there the other day and I looked around and saw so many stores in my old neighborhood shut down, so many restaurants, so many mom and pop shops that it was really heartbreaking. And you have to think of those families. You have to think of people struggling to pay their bills. And of course, you want to keep people safe. This virus is highly contagious, but we're really at a stage now where we have to weigh the pluses and minuses because health is multifaceted. It's not just physical health, it's mental health. There's a lot of components here as they relate to children that we've talked about. So there's just really a lot to think about when we, in the name of public safety right now.
Yeah, it almost feels like our officials are getting, excluding the president, they're getting dumber in their approach at this. What do lockdowns stop? The one thing we know they stop are livelihoods, our businesses, the common sense of people to make decisions for themselves. This is a highly contagious virus. We know who it affects. The need to lock down across the board, especially schools. I've got kids in a couple of schools that are open, thank God. And the principals and headmasters are smart enough to say if someone has COVID-19, well, then you don't send them to the school and others can stay home for a week, but the school continues and you keep going. And all the kids have been fine. All the teachers have been fine. And it hasn't been an issue and everyone's been educated. It just seems that when it comes to governors like Cuomo, here he's back again. We talked about him last hour. They can't get past the idea that everyone needs to be locked down, including the kids. Here's him on MSNBC yesterday. Watch.
And what we've learned, Katie, is we're not seeing spread in the schools. You see a very low percentage of positivity in the schools.
So why close the schools? If the schools aren't the problem, why do that to parents?
The local school districts consulted their parents, the teachers at the time, the teachers union at the time, and they came up with an agreement about the conditions that would open the schools and what would close the schools. The agreement in New York City was just that. If the infection rate in New York City went above 3%, the schools closed. That was the agreement.
Will, what is he talking about? He just talked about how it's not affecting kids or the schools, and then what we negotiated with the teachers union, and we got to lock this sucker down again. How do you have confidence in that at all?
You don't. And it really points to what you said in the last hour, Pete. Do they even believe their own rules? Is it simply hypocrisy that the rules apply to others but not themselves when we point to actions like that of California Governor Gavin Newsom? Or is it that they don't believe the rules in and of themselves? I will say this. It's often worth just stepping back for one moment and looking at where we are. What we have experienced over the past year is the biggest usurpation of government authority in perhaps, I don't know, half a century. We're watching quietly most of the time as we're told businesses should shut down. Thanksgiving gatherings should not occur. Just step back for a moment and go, wow, this is the place we have arrived at in our lives in 2020. Well, not everyone, I guess. Cases are rising in Mississippi, but Governor Tate Reeves has said no matter what comes, Mississippi will not, even if it's a national mandate under a Biden administration, lock down. This is what he told Neil Cavuto on Friday.
It worries me when I see some of his leading advisors talking about a 4 to 6 week lockdown across the nation. Right. It scares people. I can't tell you the number of people that I've heard from, small business owners in my state, that are concerned about this prospect. And that's the reason I thought it was so important that I make very clear that in Mississippi, we are not going to participate in a nationwide lockdown. We're not going to shut down our economy in our state because our small business owners and, quite frankly, the hundreds of thousands of Mississippians that work for them simply cannot afford to allow that to happen.
No, nobody can afford that to happen. Also, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, she tweeted the following: just like we said, Biden's team wants lockdowns. We already know that lockdowns don't stop the spread of the virus. However, they destroy small businesses and jobs, and they make it difficult for families to put food on the table. Jedediah, I think my point is just one of perspective, just one of pulling back for one moment and looking at the year 2020 and what we've allowed in terms of government authority, mandates, and this election that we've all talked about, and the investigations into any potential fraud. One thing we have to acknowledge is just simply that was wild. Massive mail-in ballots? That's different. That's irregular. The entire year, what we've watched is everything in our lives turned upside down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when it comes to the lockdowns, this is going to be a big challenge for the Biden team because you are going to have pushback from a lot of governors who are hearing from citizens of those states who are saying, listen, we can't afford this anymore. And the truth is, even if they came out and said that it would be temporary, that it would be 2 to 3 weeks, no one's going to believe them because that's what they said last time, that it was to flatten the curve. And people felt very deceived by that because then ultimately when the curve was flattened, things just persisted and persisted, and they're still going in many cases. And now, you know, when it comes to indoor dining, when it comes to, you know, we see regulations trickling in places like New York with limitations and curfews coming back for 10 p.m. So it's very scary to people. And you always have to remember, I mean, people have to put food on the table. They have families to support. So there's going to be plenty of pushback around the country against a lockdown because people just can't handle it a second time around, at least not at that level that it occurred the first time.
Yeah, guys, I'm reminded of National Lampoon's Summer Vacation when Chevy Chase drives all the way across the country to Wally World, and then he confronts the moose, and the moose tells him, folks, we're closed for 2 weeks. And then he says, moose says you're closed, I say you're open. Okay, and I think the 73 million Americans who voted for President Trump are looking, they did not vote for lockdowns. They know that there's a 99.9% survival rate of the virus for most people. They want their kids in school. They were heartened by the Attilis Gyms and Ian Smith and the salon owners and the barbers who in the first lockdown sort of set the example, but they were almost alone in doing so. I think a lot of people looked at that and said, if it were to happen again, I'm going to take part. I think you're going to see a revolt. I think you're going to see people saying, I'm keeping my restaurant open. I'm going to have a family gathering. Call the police on me and my grandpa for getting together in our home. We're not going to be 6 feet apart. We're going to hang out. We know how to handle this ourselves. I just don't think it's going to stand.
Hey, Pete.
And that will be a clash between the Democrats who want to control everything.
Well, I think you're right. Absolutely. I think there will be some rebellion. But, Pete, I would just say I don't think it would be limited to 73 million Trump voters. I don't think economic shutdowns was something that only Republicans were opposed to. In fact, I think if you look this last election, I think economic shutdowns was a winner for Republicans. I think Democrats actually don't even realize lies. All of the positions they took in this past election, the American public largely reject, whether or not that be racial politics, identity politics, or economic shutdowns. And I don't think I'm the only one that notices that, for what it's worth, nor any of the three of us, for that matter. Bill Maher on his show last night said the exact same thing. He says, while many might have voted against President Trump, they didn't vote for economic shutdowns and identity politics. Listen to this.
Democrats were supposed to flip the Senate and didn't. Supposed to flip state legislatures, not a one. And they lost seats in the House in a year that was so much about making people aware of racism. Their share of minority votes went down. The message to Democrats from so much of the country seems to be, we don't like Trump, but we still can't bring ourselves to vote for you. Republicans are the party of don't wear masks, kids in cages, lock her up, and Democrats are the party of every hypersensitive social justice warrior woke story in the news.
Yeah, so there's some truth. I disagree with some of what he said about Republicans. I don't think all Republicans don't wear masks. That's a stereotype that's gotten too much headway. But regardless, I think some of what he's saying is true about, this woke nonsense that has, taken front and center stage with Democrats. And we talked about the defund the police movement. We talked about, these lockdowns and the implications. The assumption is somehow that, Democrats don't own businesses and Democrats don't have to put food on the table for their families. A lot of Democrats were looking at this and saying, this is wild. This could happen again a second or a third or a fourth time. To what end? So I think Will makes a great point that this was these points, and we talked about defund police in the same capacity, really had the capacity to widen the tent in terms of messaging and who they were actually reaching and who, and you look at the House races and you look at some of the Senate races and the expectations of Democrat wins that were unfulfilled. And I think that these conversations we're having right now were a large part of why that happened.
I think you're right. Several of the president's legal challenges have been struck down in Pennsylvania, while a hand recount is underway in Georgia. So what is the president's path forward? Senator Marsha Blackburn is going to give us a preview next.
A pair of judges in Pennsylvania denying 6 legal challenges brought by the Trump campaign alleging irregularities with more than 8,000 ballots.
This comes as a hand recount of nearly 5 million ballots is underway in Georgia. So where does the president's team go from here?
Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and she joins us now. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
So, Senator, let's talk about, if we might, the president's path forward. I saw Byron York on Laura Ingraham's program last night. He talked about the fact that he had a conversation with the president. The president had seen some of his commentary on Fox, and the president called him. It seemed that the president's path forward, in his estimation, is to find votes in Georgia and Arizona, perhaps through these recounts, and to win legal challenges in Pennsylvania and places like Michigan. We have seen in the last couple of days a couple of legal challenges being thrown out in Pennsylvania, another one where President Trump scored a win in some ballots tossed aside for improper ID proof. What is the president's path forward in your estimation right now?
Well, we know that the path is going to be a tough one. And you look at the results as you were recounting from the week with some wins and some losses. And we also know that you've got the Million MAGA march that is going to be in D.C. today. I think the thing that is the focus right now is, first of all, the attention that has been called to some of these balloting processes, the harvesting of the ballots, the mailing out, the wholesale mailing out of ballots, treating it like it's some Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes entry form, and everybody gets one in their mailbox. Fill it out, send it back in if you want to participate. We know that in elections going forward, those practices and processes are probably going to be pulled to an end because your state legislatures are going to participate in reworking the system. And thank goodness election law is set in place by our state legislatures and then is implemented by your local election commission. So regardless of the outcome. And of course, I still think there is a way for President Trump to win by counting every legal vote and throwing out every illegally cast vote. And I imagine that each of us know people, I certainly know people that received more than one ballot at their home, and those ballots were addressed to former residents. So it shows you these rolls need to be cleaned up.
Senator, we want to ask you about the balance of power in D.C. Lots of eyes on the Georgia Senate races right now, and those eyes will be there for several weeks to come. And we're hearing that the RNC plans to spend at least $20 million on the runoffs. Your thoughts on the spending in that race and what people can expect to see in the coming weeks?
Yeah, you know, Jed, I think that this is going to be the most expensive race we have ever seen, and all eyes are on Georgia. And one of the lessons from this is you have to get your voters to the polls. You cannot let people slip through the cracks. I know I'm going to be in Georgia knocking on doors, and I'm looking forward to doing that, because as much money as gets spent, and of course Republicans were outspent as much as 5-1 in some of these Senate races, and you know what? We still won. The reason we won, we had a ground game. We knew where to find our voters. We knew to get them to the polls and to make certain that their ballots were cast. And come January 5th, that's what you're going to see with these races in Georgia.
Absolutely. Well, Senator Marsha Blackburn, we appreciate your time this morning. You're absolutely right. When you flood the zone with mail-in ballots and they don't have accountability, and you get rid of signature requirements, or in some cases it's shown that signature requirements don't even work, it raises a lot of questions, and that's what the president's fighting for. We appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito warns of threats against free speech and religious liberty in the wake of strict lockdowns. A look at the fallout on his speech coming up next. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito warning that Americans' personal freedoms, like religious liberty and free speech, are being imperiled by strict lockdowns across the country. Listen.
The pandemic has resulted in previously unimaginable restrictions on individual liberty. We have never before seen restrictions as severe, extensive, and prolonged as those experienced for most of 2020.
The entirety of his remarks are very much worth listening to. His comments have already sparked a backlash. Here to discuss, Senior Counsel and Director of the Center for Christian Ministries with Alliance Defending Freedom, Ryan Tucker. Ryan, thank you so much for being with us this morning. So why the backlash? Is a justice not allowed to, pontificate based on how he sees the law being applied today?
Well, all Justice Alito is really doing is he's reading from his past decisions. He's recounting over the last several years the attacks that have taken place on our freedom of religion, of free speech, of assembly. And so he's merely recounting what he's already said in opinions that have been issued by the court, or rulings that the court has given.
So, Ryan, then why then do you get backlash like this? Here's a partial tweet from Senator Elizabeth Warren. She wrote, "Supreme Court justices aren't supposed to be political hacks. This right-wing speech is nakedly partisan." I didn't hear anything about Republicans or Democrats per se, just, restrictions on churches. Again, why the blowback? Is it because it's resisting government control?
I think so. And, the words that he stated were truth, and they're difficult. I mean, these last several months, we have seen an extensive amount of government overreach. We represent, for example, Calvary Chapel, Dayton Valley in Nevada. And that's one of the instances that was mentioned in that video. And there, casinos are open at 50% capacity, whereas at the time we filed our lawsuit on behalf of that church, the church doors are limited to 50 people. So you can have thousands of people at a Las Vegas casino playing a blackjack and craps on the casino floor. But if you happen to have a few dozen people inside a church, then those individuals are subject to civil and criminal penalties. So that's absolute insanity, and there shouldn't be any backlash on that.
I mean, is any other example needed when you lay it out like that? I mean, you also have unfortunately, my home state of New Jersey, Governor Murphy saying the Bill of Rights is above his pay grade. When you have governors and others speaking in that manner, thank goodness we have Supreme Court justices who look toward first principles and are willing to defend them. Ryan Tucker, thank you very much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stay there all the way through 2021.
For how much?
And all the way.
For 30 grand.
Yeah, would you get bored?
And I'm sure
30,000.
No way, and I'm sure I'd have a better shot than I do today, right here.
I bet you can. You can do the show from there.
I could do it from there.
Yeah.
Forget about it. I'm signing up.
All right. Yep. I think I'm about to join you. Rick, you in?
Does it include airfare?
Who cares at that price?
Oh,
30,000. How much are you spending on your mortgage and rent?
30 grand.
It costs a lot of money to get to the Maldives. I'm just saying that's an expensive flight. But heck yeah, come on, man. That should be sold out by the time I'm done doing weather right now, is all I can imagine. Here you go. Here's your temps as you're waking up this morning. Cooler weather. Obviously, you guys, we had such an amazing week across much of the eastern seaboard. A lot of that is gone now. We're going to be seeing temps at least across the northeast cool down quite a bit. Out across the west, they've been really cold. Now, there's a little bit of a system moving through that's causing a lot of wind today. Take a look at this. Everywhere you see this yellow, we have wind advisories. Everywhere you see the brown, we have high wind warnings. We're going to be seeing winds today in around the 60-mile-an-hour range, and that means especially along the Front Range where things have been so incredibly dry, we're going to watch for that threat of fires. Now, today is a great day across the East Coast. Enjoy it. Tomorrow, a little bit more shower activity comes. It's from that system that you see that's beginning to develop this morning. A little bit of a front cutting right across parts of the Central Plains. This is what's causing all that wind behind this system, and then behind that is where we have a really significant snowstorm, especially across parts of the Pacific Northwest, getting a lot of rain, getting a lot of mountain snow, not much of that penetrating down across parts of the Southwest where we really need it, but we'll take it even up across parts of the far northern plains and in across parts of the northern Rockies. Temperature-wise, we're talking about a really nice day today across parts of the South. Very windy again, but look at that 80s there. We got the cooler temps back behind this. Overall, really not that bad still yet, not all that cold. All right, guys, back to you.
I've got a little math here. So if I heard the story correctly, 30,000 for a year, right? So if you're spending more than $2,500 a month on rent or mortgage, you're getting just the same kind of deal, all right? Your kids are probably, mine are, in distance learning anyway. And I was just told you get airport transfers, Rick. So you got to buy your ticket, but they'll bring you from the airport to the resort.
Will, is it until 2020? Is it until 2021 or all of 2021? There's no way it's a whole year.
Jedediah, you read the story. Can you clear this up for us?
I actually am not. Oh, it's all through. I'm being told through my ear it's all through 2021. But that's okay. I mean, who gets bored of the beach and beautiful weather? No one.
Let's get the shot up and running because Pete and I will be doing the show from the Maldives very soon. All right. All right, still ahead. After Republicans pick up several key victories in the House, Democrats heading back to the drawing board. Our next guest says the socialist wing of the party suffered major...
On to another segment here. Amid escalating fights in her own party, Speaker Nancy Pelosi on the defense after predictions for a blue wave in the House fell short.
We had a very big win in the last election. It is smaller now, but it is not, we still have the power of the majority.
Do you accept any responsibility for the loss in House seats?
I take responsibility, credit for winning a majority and holding.
Our next guest argues the results of last week's election shows Americans are rejecting socialism, blaming the left wing for the party's losses.
Here now to explain, editorial director and research fellow at the Heartland Institute, Justin Haskins. Justin, I can't help but notice the parallel between Pete's story on Bill Belichick holding up his rings and Nancy Pelosi suggesting, no, we won too. Did they win? Can the Democratic Party claim these wins that she's trying to claim?
Oh, no, they actually had an absolutely horrible day. If you just put the presidency aside and we just pretend that we don't know what's going to happen with that, They lost several seats in the House. Nancy Pelosi may not even be able to keep her speakership. It's very, very likely that Republicans will keep the Senate, I believe. Obviously, it depends on what happens in Georgia, but I think that Republicans will keep at least one of those 2 seats. Democratic moderates like Joe Manchin, they're still in Congress, who are going to block the socialist wing of the Democratic Party. Republicans kept control of 29 state legislatures. Democrats only flipped 1. It looks like they're going to flip 1, but Republicans actually flipped 1 too, offsetting that. So this big blue wave they were expecting at the state legislative level didn't happen. 8 out of 11 gubernatorial races were won by Republicans, and the 3 that Democrats won, only 3, were won by incumbents who were expected to win. So when you take all of this together, it's obvious what happened, regardless of whether or not voters voted for Donald Trump. Some of them didn't vote for Donald Trump, but actually voted for Republicans. Yeah. That's a clear rebuke of the most far-left policies of the Democratic Party, like Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, ending the filibuster in the Senate, adding 2 states, defunding the police, packing the Supreme Court. Americans do not want these policies. That is beyond clear.
But, Justin, you know, a guy like Joe Manchin feels like yesterday's Democrat. There aren't many blue dog Democrats out there. So while you may be speaking to a political reality of 2020, what evidence do you have that the Democrat Party isn't going to continue to lurch further left, that the energy isn't with socialists or left-wingers who are driving the agenda, who are trying to railroad Nancy Pelosi, too?
Oh, actually, I believe that it will continue lurching left. I don't think there's any question about that at all. In fact, I actually think there's really strong data. We're putting together a report right now at the Heartland Institute that looks at how socialists and far-left progressives did within the Democratic Party during the election. And within the Democratic Party, it looks like they gained a lot of power at the state legislative level and even within House seats. It didn't translate to overall election results. So although they didn't gain more power outside of the Democratic Party, within the Democratic Party, they did gain a lot more power. And so the socialists are absolutely taking over the Democratic Party. It's just not winning them elections with moderate voters and with conservative voters.
Well, Justin, some of this infighting is going to be fascinating to watch. I, for one, have my popcorn ready. I don't know about you, but thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Of course, New York City residents are fleeing the Big Apple with apartment vacancies hitting a 14-year high. So what does this say about the city's Democratic leadership? Analysis coming after the break.
This holiday season, brace yourself for shipping chaos, as online sales are expected to surge up to 35% compared to last year.
To help us get a jump start on our Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday shopping and shipping, Kurt the Cyber Guy is here to preview this year's top tech gifts. He joins us right now. Kurt, good morning. Help us out.
Hey, Pete, good morning to you. Who knew that Will needed driving lessons as a Christmas gift? We're all pitch in for that, right?